Hey, this is Jill Officer, and you're listening to Tobin Tonight.
Let's hop right into things here, Jill. What drew you to curling more than any other sport? Because you were involved in a lot of different sports when you were younger, like your dad being a hockey coach, your mom a sports enthusiast. Obviously, they were putting you into like soccer, figure skating, baton twirling. So, what made curling stand out for you?
That's a really good question that I've been asked a number of times, and I'm not sure that I have a great answer for it. As you mentioned, my dad was a hockey coach, very involved in hockey, and my mom was a coordinator of a junior curling league. So I was always hanging around the hockey rink or the curling rink. But for whatever reason, I didn't end up on hockey skates. I ended up on figure skates, and I got all my badges there. And like you said, I did baton, I played soccer. My parents just put me in a whole bunch of different things, which I am a real believer of, and, loved that I got to experience all those different things. But for whatever reason, I just had maybe a little more natural ability for curling or something. And I think with the curling too is like when I was younger, my mom put me into like bonspiels with my friends. And so I got to hang out with my friends outside of school. And then even as I got into 14, 15, 16, 17, I was playing in like mixed bonspiels on the weekend, and I got to hang out with my friends. So it was just, I think, a combination of a little bit of natural ability and just that I had friends who also curled, and it kind of went from there.
I understand that because, listen, if someone said, Brian, you would love bowling when I was 6 or 7, I'd be saying, you're a liar. They tell me it's cool. I'd be like, now I know you're lying. Because I remember back when I was a little bit younger, I was actually in basketball. I wasn't into hockey so much. I think I just started hockey, and we were in a basketball tournament, and I wasn't getting a lot of playing time. To be honest with you, I was probably getting like 5 minutes. But in bowling, we were having this like winter festival, and we actually got to bowl with the Paralympics. And it was like a cross path. I believe it was like same time as our game, and I think it was like basketball semifinals, or we were hosting a tournament in our own gym. And I remember telling our coach, listen, I've got a chance here at bowling to bowl with some of the Paralympic bowlers, so I'm going to go to that. And I remember one guy on our team in particular, a lot of them were kind of like, what are you doing? Like, we're in a basketball tournament. We got a chance at a gold medal, and you want us to go out and play bowling? And I was like, listen, Steven, you're getting 20 plus points in this game. I am warming the bench for you basically when you come off. So I was like, yeah, I'm done. I'm going there. I still like participated in the basketball games after, but bowling just felt more up my
Exactly.
alley.
And it's kind of what your personal experience and passion is. And if I especially realized when I retired from curling how much of my community, my personal community, and how much of a community curling is. So it would be the same for you with bowling, is that you probably developed a community, and that was your connection to a community of people. And so that's where you're going to go, is where you feel like you contribute, right? And that's how I felt. It was like I felt like I contributed, and I felt like I had a connection to it. So I stayed there for a while.
Yeah, imagine if you went into like the police academy. That would be confusing, right? Hello, officer.
People still confuse my last name with me being in some type of law enforcement.
I mean, it could work in your favor in some cases. Now, I know in this hour, or close to this hour, as much time as we got, we're going to talk about your career and other interests. But I got to ask you, being from Manitoba, do you know a Jennifer Jones?
I kind of know her.
Yeah, vaguely. We went to like a curling party years ago, and I've never heard of her or seen of her since. I'm just kidding. I believe you've been friends or so since the age of 15? Like, I know people that long, but we're not even that close or have the success that you have. But that being said, have there ever been moments where you kind of had to either butt heads or like have a sitting out and be like, actually, I think we should do this shot? no, I think we should go this way. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, we both have our own input here.
Of course. I mean, that's part of being a team. And it wasn't just always between me and Jennifer, right? I spent a lot of time together with your teammates, and with curling being such a small group of people, you can't necessarily get away. And, it's not like a hockey team traveling together where it's like, oh, I don't want to hang out with those two people anymore. I'm going to go hang out with I need a break from them. I'm going to go hang out with them. It's like, we got 4 people that are together all the time. Right. So, yeah. And then you become like siblings. So of course you kind of butt heads here and there. But I also really believe that the differences that Jennifer and I had, and the different sort of views and ends of the spectrum, because in a lot of ways we're similar, and in a lot of ways we're quite opposite. But I really feel like that was a contribution to the success that we ended up having, was that we had those differing views and perspectives that opened each other's eyes to another way of looking at things, whether it was a shot or whether it was about how we should plan our season or anything, right? So I think that was a big part of our success, was because of that.
And listen, you've been very successful, like the Olympics in 2014, 6 Scotties, 2 Worlds. I believe from 2005 to 2018, obviously, we're going to cross off the Olympic year. You only missed getting a gold, silver, or bronze in the Scotties once. Like I said, we're knocking off the Olympic year. You go undefeated at the Olympics, undefeated at the 2018 Worlds. And some people would say, well, duh, you should. You're pro athletes. But listen, as someone like a keyboard warrior would do, they talk a lot. But then when it comes to doing it, then they realize how hard it is. It's not easy. And to those who think it is, go out and try it. I mean, even Brad Gushu, keep a Newfoundland reference here, and Carrie Enerson, both successful on their own teams, they struggled in the doubles, but they were down at 0-3 at one point, but they fought back to make the tournament interesting. But even though they had individual success, it doesn't always translate into, I guess, double success or group success. In their own groups maybe, but when you're trying to combine people, you don't know how that's going to turn out. So obviously, when you look back at that, you got to think wow, we went undefeated twice at one point. That's got to be kind of cool.
I remember going into the Olympics particularly, and I think we played 3 of the top teams in our first 4 games. Yeah. So we were just looking to go 2-1 in our first 3 games because of who we were playing at the Olympics. I remember thinking that. And so for us to come out of there at 3-0 in that beginning of the week was a really big deal. But I think going back, it was when we had early success, even winning the Scotties in 2005, and we always went through the hard way. We never found an easy way to win those Scotties. So it actually took us a long time to learn how to put ourselves in a better position at the end of the week, that we weren't scrounging and grinding just to get to the end of the week. We were actually putting ourselves in a position maybe by midweek to, be there at the end of the week. So it actually took us a long time to sort of figure out how to do that. And I think going undefeated at the Olympics and then undefeated in the Worlds, I think that was just a little bit of a culmination of that experience to be able to do that. And I'm really proud of that. But you certainly never go into either one of those events saying, let's go undefeated. I mean, you're playing against the best teams in the world. When you think about playing Anna Hasselberg or Eve Muirhead in those events, and it's just it very easily can lose to, and you know what, and we've talked about this before, or people have talked about this before, a lot of the nations get up to play against Canada, and so we're often playing the teams at their best, and so Latvia comes along and they want to beat Canada because it'll look good on their resume for the week, and they beat Canada, and so to go through those events undefeated is like I said, something to be very proud of, but you certainly don't go into those events trying to do that because it's really hard.
I like what you said there. get up for Canada, because it reminds me of like the 2002 Olympics when a reporter asked Wayne Gretzky something along the lines of like, they're after losing, I think, to Sweden, and I don't know how many games how many games they lost, or if that was their first loss, but people thought they were going to go undefeated, and the reporter asked Gretzky, like something along the lines of like, "Are you mad or are you upset, or are you hot?" I think, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm hot." I was about to say, "Damn right, I'm hot," but I think he just said like, "Yeah, I'm hot," because they were supposed to come in and basically be the best team in the world, and here they were struggling in this tournament. But I think, to go off your point, it's good to find that adversity early, whether it be in a season, in your career, because then you can kind of build off it. Like, you face the struggles early. When you were saying that you won in 2005 here in Newfoundland, and if you never faced it, like you kind of went undefeated, but if you never faced it before that, like then what do you do when you get success? Like if everything was just up, 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 and you never faced a down, when you faced a down later on in your career, you'd kind of be like, all right, why do we do here?
Yeah, for sure. And it's like, like you referenced hockey, and it's the same thing. Like teams get up to play against Canada. And if you're not prepared as the Team Canada going into that event, whether it's hockey or whether it's curling, if you're not prepared to have those teams come and play that well against you, or you're not aware that that's what's going to happen, or not prepared for it, then it's going to backfire on you. And that's what I kind of thought happened. And maybe it was the 2002 games with the hockey team, or maybe it was the 06 games where they showed up 3 days before the game started, expecting because they were Team Canada to do really well, and they didn't. Yeah. And so it's just like you can't sort of take it for granted, because when you put that, that Team Canada in those positions of the Olympics or World Championships in hockey or curling, there needs to be an awareness that you need to be prepared for that.
I want to ask you, now that you're in the broadcast side of things, you have a degree in communications from Red River. So like this was obviously something you were interested in, but being a former player, are there times like you're looking at a certain person's shot or how the game is presented and you're thinking like, that's not how I would take that shot, or giving your own kind of insight, like this is how I would take this shot, because it's, you're getting a former player's analysis here.
Yeah. I watch curling on TV all the time, but I definitely think that when you're sitting in the booth, you're taking a different approach. You're taking a perspective on it, because you're trying to give the viewers a perspective as if you were out there almost. And so I do find that I pay a little bit more attention to the games and certain things that teams are doing or not doing than if I'm just watching as a viewer. And so, I would maybe tend to notice things that, maybe I wouldn't notice if I was just a viewer, or not just a viewer, but if I was just watching, as a fan. And then when you're bantering back and forth with the people in the booth too, then there's different conversation going on that maybe you wouldn't have if you were just watching as a fan. So it's a little bit different perspective, and it's not, it's taken some time to adjust to it. Like as much as you think, oh, great, I get to sit in a booth and talk curling, suddenly you're part of a different kind of team that has its own dynamics, and trying not to speak over one another, trying not to just repeat what someone else has said, trying to pay attention to different aspects of what's going on the ice so that you can analyze it and speak about it. So there's a bit of a transition period there, trying to, and I haven't perfected it by any means. I enjoy it, but it's got its own challenges.
Yeah, I know for myself, I really thought once I graduated from sports journalism, communications, did radio broadcasting, I would be in broadcasting doing play-by-play or hosting. I love that. I have the background, but networks tend to hire ex-players, I guess for the name value, but I still think you can get the best of both worlds if you hire a combo. A person knowing the sport, being in situations, play the sport, yes, because then you can kind of analyze the player's mindset. But then someone who knows how to present it on TV, kind of the history a little bit of the sport or the background, because obviously they're interested in it, so they've studied it. or looked up the whole history of it. Because I guess as a player, you wouldn't know like, oh, well, this is what happened back in 2015, or this is a similar shot to this person has faced, because you probably were too busy focused on playing the game.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I've thought about or noticed, is just because I do have a journalism background and I did work on TV for a period of time. I think that sometimes, the play-by-play will always have all the correct data, right? The color, they can kind of get away with stuff, right? They can kind of say things that maybe aren't 100% true, or they might pronounce the person's name not quite correctly. And it doesn't seem like a big deal to them necessarily. But for me, it was if you didn't have someone's name pronounced correctly or spelled correctly, it was automatic fail, right? Yeah. So, there's just things like that where I came in with that background knowledge that maybe wasn't as prominent for some people, not just in the booth, but like in general, And so I think it's good to have that background as well. Otherwise, it's probably a pretty steep learning curve.
So like, when did you realize you had a passion or interest for broadcasting? Was it before, during, or like after your curling career?
I guess it was always kind of there, because I graduated my journalism program like 20 years ago. So I worked in TV for a few years, and then we won the Scotties in 2005, and it was just too hard to sort of juggle full time. So I did some freelance work on and off for a while. So I always kind of had that as a backup, right? Yeah. And so when I knew that my career was coming to an end and I was going to step away or at least take a break, I made some connections with people at networks and stuff, thinking that was potentially something that I wanted to do. And then, I started doing it, and while I do enjoy it, and I would love to continue to do it for a period of time, it's not necessarily something that I see myself doing for the next 15 years, right? Which is why I actually have gone back to university. I'm taking kinesiology because I need to get a kinesiology degree in order to do a master's in mental performance for sport. So that's sort of where I'm headed. But in the meantime, I love doing the CBC work. It gives me a chance to watch curling with a really close eye and to keep track of what's happening, what's changing in the game, and what's happening with sweeping and sweeping techniques and things like that. So I love being around the game. I love sitting in the booth and talking about curling. I just don't see myself doing it for the next 15 or 20 years, which is why I've made this other plan to do some mental performance. So I'd love to be able to continue to do some of the commentary, in the next 5 years or so, and then see where it goes.
So like, what can you do with that? Like, is there subdivisions of interest? I know I have some friends at MUN, so Memorial University down here in Newfoundland, that did, I believe, sort of what you were doing, maybe a little bit different. But I never really dived further into the conversation than just the surface. So if you don't mind, what other areas or what exactly are you doing per se? There's
certainly different aspects that you can focus on within, and I'm only going into my second year, so I haven't really narrowed my focus too much at this point.
This is your rookie. This is like your sophomore year.
Yeah. So, there's you could take the athletic therapy avenue where you would be an athletic therapist or go on to pursue physiotherapy. There's more of the physical education, like being a phys ed teacher sort of avenue. I'm just sort of looking to get my general kinesiology degree at this point, but I'm certainly maybe focusing some of my classes more on psychology, any sort of classes that might contribute to me being able to provide or become a mental performance consultant. But I certainly know that I can't just do that with a kinesiology degree, and that's why my plan is to continue on to get to do a master's program that's about 18 months long, to then be a mental performance consultant at that point.
So that's like another way to stay in curling in another role, right? Like if Jennifer or any other team came to you and you met all the criteria to take on this role, you'd be all in?
100%. That's after a lot of discussion with my own sports psychologist over the last few years, the discussion sort of evolved to a point where I realized that I enjoy connecting with athletes and I enjoy helping athletes. I enjoy sharing my experience and lessons with other athletes for them to improve and get better. But I've always felt that the mental side of sport is so important and sometimes gets overlooked. It kind of depends on the teams or the athletes, and that there's more to it than just the mental side of it on the ice. Like it's the mental side of life, basically. It's like the holistic view. And so I just over time realized that I enjoy doing that, and I enjoy having those, connected, deep conversations with athletes and sharing my experience with the hopes that they will learn something from all of my experience.
You also have a niece in curling. Has she ever come to you for advice or support? Because, you have the experience and the success, so it kind of makes sense to, call you up and be like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? I'm actually blanking on her name right now, but has she ever called up, Aunt Jill for any advice?
No, you know what? It's Kristen McCush, plays with Team Tracy Fleury, and she is such a great kid. I call her a kid, but she's 28 now. And
no, listen, I'm almost 30, so if you call that a kid, I'm okay with that. I'm fine. Let's go with it.
But she's such a good kid, really well-rounded. I'm happy to do anything that I can to help her be the most successful athlete that she can be, and whatever team she's on, which has been pretty consistent for the last number of years. So I did coach them for a period of time in that season. I couldn't commit to anything long-term because I was sort of in this transition phase from being a competitive athlete to I don't know what I want to do. Yeah. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and that just changed a whole bunch of things. And it was a good opportunity for me to start back at school with so much of it being online. That just makes my life a little easier to do it that way. So, I said to her and her team, anytime you need help, you want to talk, you want to ask about something, I'm here for you, but I'm not, you have to understand that I may have those conversations with other teams.
No, I get it. No favoritism. It's like a mafia style. It's like, you're my niece. I love you, but if someone asks for my help, I'm gonna help them too. I gotta look out for myself. It's like, wait, you're not loyal to the family. It's like, listen, never said I was loyal to the family. I'll give you some help. I know
you make it sound so like I'm whatever to my niece, but in all honesty, it's just that my long-term goals didn't necessarily start to fit with me being able to have any sort of full commitment to them at this time. So I just said, I'll happily come out and work with you on the ice. You want me to come hold the broom, whatever I can help you with. But, just understand that I'm also, trying to do some consultation work with other teams through Next Gen program or whatever. So, and that's fine. She does still, we talk about curling and things like that.
I like that metaphor, because I can just imagine if you just said, if I don't know, just say if you had when Sidney Crosby has a kid and you've got Sidney Crosby in the room and just say he's 17 or 16 and he's like, Dad, I want you to come out on the ice, but you just stand there and you just give me passes. It's you realize you have Sidney Crosby out on the ice and you're not going to ask him hey, how can I improve my game? Or how is this nah, just you stand there, you feed me and my buddies pucks and we're just going to fire him into an open net. It's
yeah.
Good job. Way to have Sidney on.
Yeah, no, my niece definitely, she doesn't expect that. Or they appreciate and value my input.
Yeah. I want to ask you, of course, because now I'm in Newfoundland. We mentioned this earlier about 2005, winning gold in 2005 down here. Now, other places obviously won too, but Newfoundland, I'm sure, because Brad Gushu can attest to it too as well. I'm sure he's had a fair time in his hometown winning, but screeched in. Were you ever screeched in? What was your mindset of it? Because listen, between you and me and everyone that's listened to the Laura Walker interview, Laura Walker was I did not like screeching in, did not like it. I did it. And I was like, you know what? Fair. She's honest to us. She's not coming on here and saying, you know what? It was great. I'd do it again, because someone's going to come to Newfoundland and say, I heard you on an interview. You said you loved it. And then she's like, actually, I didn't. Then you're called a fraud. At least she's telling people, I've done it. Listen, I love you, Newfies.
Does anybody ever say that they love it?
I feel like if you ask Brad, Brad's going to be like, dude, I get screeched in all the time. I'd be like, no, you don't, Brad. We are Newfoundlanders. We don't have to. You choose to.
Yeah. You know what? I think I can think of 2 or 3 times actually that we were sort of screeched in. You come there for a curling event and they sort of coordinated it, make it happen and whatever. So I love the tradition of it. I love the idea of it. I love the fact that I can say that I've been screeched in more than once in Newfoundland. But, the whole process of it, the screech, the cod, I'm kind of with Laura on that.
Yeah, you know what? It is a bit much. I feel people like the screech part. The reciting the passage is probably fun because, like, you're looking at me like, what are you even saying here? But I think the cod kissing is a little bit fishy. I get it. I want to ask you a bit of a scenario style question here, or like a what if question. I know we chatted prior to this interview on the success you had in 2014 in Sochi and the Worlds, but like 2010, it was right here in Canada, Vancouver. You mentioned your team you weren't hitting your stride, or you weren't getting in the groove. But say like 2014 hasn't happened yet. It's 2010. Like, how bummed were you that you didn't get to rep Canada at home?
Yeah, I remember feeling quite devastated, actually. It was a tough one to swallow because it was our second time playing in the Olympic trials. With it being in Vancouver, it was such a huge opportunity. And it was also our second time being a favorite. Well, the first trials in 2005, we had just won the Scotties. And then in the trials in 2009, we were 2-time defending Scotties champs, and we had won the Worlds in 2008. So we were favorites going in. And both of those Olympic trials, I don't even know if we had a sniff of the playoffs by midweek. Like, it just didn't happen. It wasn't meant to be or something. I don't know. So I remember after Vancouver particularly that, I don't know, it was just really tough to swallow, I think, because I just didn't know where we were at. I didn't know where I was at in terms of how much longer I was going to continue to play. Like, there was just a lot of question in my mind. So I just didn't like it. So it was really hard to take at the time. And then ultimately we decided to make a team change. And I felt that, I owed it to myself to continue to play at that time to see if things were different, if things were better, or if things changed or whatever. And obviously we went on to win the Olympics in 2014. So it worked out.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, how history can be, because Vancouver, you got Crosby's Olympic goal. Paul Martin wins it for the men's curling. It's like, it's really interesting because now Cheryl Bernard came in. I think she had silver. But like her quote obviously gets a lot of recognition because I think Laura Walker actually mentioned it in hers as like one of her biggest inspirations was Cheryl Bernard, and she almost had the chance to work with Cheryl, but then the pandemic happened. So thank you, pandemic. But it's like her quote was almost like, I didn't lose gold, I won silver. And that's the way she took it. I'm like, you can spin that as a PR stunt, as more or less saying like, listen, like, it's funny because like you don't want to go out there saying like, crap, I lost gold but got silver. Like, her approach is more or less, you're not granted silver, you earned it and you won that silver. Like, anyone out there listening to this right now, in the future, whenever, might say like, yeah, okay, Cheryl, but she has a point. Like, you're devastated in the moment, but years later you're back. You look back and you say, look at what we walked away with here in the Olympics. We have an Olympic silver. I know I got like bowling trophies when I was 10. I was probably pissed. We were second best, but now I look back and I'm like, you know what? Like, we were second best, and this plaque is nice to have years later.
You know what? Like, I think wasn't Cheryl's book called The Silver Lining or something, right? Yeah. And I actually haven't read that book, but one of the medals that I'm most proud of for us is the silver medal we won at the World Championships in 2015. And part of the reason for that was that was only a year after we won the Olympics. And it's really hard to play at a high level of anything after the Olympics. And you see a lot of athletes actually take time off, and depending on the sport that they're in. In curling, we can't really get away with that, unfortunately. But you see someone like, Tessa Virtue and Scott Moyer, they took like 2 years off after the Sochi Games before they came back, right? I know there was a couple of losers that did the same. There was, and so in curling, unfortunately, it's just not an opportunity to do that, and that we're kind of right back into it. But we literally had 6 months of just all this wonderful stuff, like appearances, doing this, doing that. People wanted us here and wanted us there and all this stuff. And then we right back into curling season, traveling on the tour, et cetera, et cetera. Like, so sometimes I look back at that and think, how did we even win the Scotties that year? And then go on to win go to the Worlds. And, we didn't play superb in the gold medal game, but we came on strong at the end and really put some pressure on Switzerland. And Alina Pats had to make a draw to a button to win the World Championships in the end, right? But the fact that we did that a year after the Olympics, after like how busy we were and all this stuff, like, to me, that's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I don't know if I've ever had that conversation with my team, but I was just, when I look at that now, I'm like, wow, like, we were disappointed in the moment. But a year after the Olympics, after everything that happens when you are an Olympic champion, I was like, I actually not sure how we did that.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because like people make a big deal in hockey, basketball, football, whatever, when a team goes like back to back or comes back like to try to defend their title. Now, I'm not a big stats guy, but let's pretend I am. I believe from like 2005 to 2018, minus the Olympics, you medaled every year beside 2014 Sochi Olympics and 2017. You've got 6 gold, 3 silver, 3 bronze. Basically, you got hardware for over a decade. You could tell that to somebody and they would say, I don't believe you. You're basically telling me from that point for this long stretch, I'm going to come home with a medal, whether it's gold, silver, or bronze. They're like, no, you're ridiculous. But you did. And I think that's crazy, because I like, though, like, again, you have the Bergeron Taves in the background, but I expected a little bit more of like, this is my whole rack of gold, silver. These are all the trophies. And I'd be like,
those are all in a bin around the corner, actually.
They're all in my closet. I'm a very humble person. Like, like that's crazy to me, because of course you make a big deal of it, but I'm not the only one to think that, because I believe TSN put you on a poll in 2019, or put out a poll, sorry, in 2019, and you were voted the greatest female Canadian second, say that 3 times fast, and 6th greatest in Canadian curling history. That's male and female. Airbud, the dog, was also included. He wasn't happy with his ranking. But like those obviously, looking at all those accomplishments, even with your Scotties, there's only 3 that have 6 titles. 2 are named Jones, Jennifer and Colleen, and then we have yourself. I feel like you should add Jones to the end.
Yeah, the officer and the Joneses.
Yeah, there you go. I feel like that should be like, if you ever come up with a podcast, that's what you should do. Just have Jennifer on, Colleen, and be like, officer and the Joneses. And people are like, I feel like that's a movie. And they're like, no, you're thinking officer and a gentleman. Yeah. But no, I mean, that's crazy. I actually thought of it too, because I want to ask you that, because from the media standpoint, like if you were still somewhat involved in media or wanted to get involved in media, do you ever think about doing stuff like that, like a podcast? Or do you think like, whoa, listen, I've got my hands full?
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point I've got my hands full. It crossed my mind a couple of years ago, maybe. But I don't know. It was just nothing I ever like was super serious about.
Oh, I had some ideas ready. I had like On the Rocks, Throwing Stones, where you talk smack on other curlers, and they're like, I thought we were friends. I thought she was supposed to be nice. It's like, buddy, the podcast is called Throwing Stones. Like, come on. Yeah. What do you think was going to happen? But no, I mean, that's all. I just thought it was interesting because, yeah, you see a lot of people now get into the podcast side of things and into the media, but I don't know. Now, I could be dead wrong on this, but I know sometimes when I'm on Twitter, you'll see someone always tweet out about curling, like, this is what you expect. But I would be interested if you had like a former curler, like yourself, Jennifer Jones, Carrie when she's done, Laura, whatever, but like to get more insight. Like, you don't actually have to talk about curling the whole time, but like your experiences. Like, I know you have books for that as well, but we're in the mindset where people are not really sitting down and reading books. Like, I would rather hear your story in your own voice.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's an option. And then, there is a curling podcast out there with Kevin Martin that certainly covers a lot of stuff. But, and I've done a couple of other podcasts with about coaching in curling and whatever else. Yeah, I guess there's always room for more curling.
I meant to bring this up earlier in talking about the Olympics and silver, because you mentioned this earlier about being proud of the silver. I remember back in 2006 watching Brad Gusha win in Torino, and I thought it was super cool as a Newfoundlander and thinking oh yeah, he'll be back again. But you forget that the team he had was relatively young, and now he's fighting for this other chance to go back. But it's a different perspective as he's older, because now he has kids, he wants them there so they get the experience, I guess, to see him play and just appreciate it more, I guess, now that you're a little bit older, you've been there, and then you're during that time when you're younger, you're probably oh yeah, we'll be back. But then as years go on, you haven't been back, you're kind of oh my God, if I ever get this chance again, I'm really gonna soak it in.
Well, yeah, and like Brad said, they were fairly young when they went, which most athletes are, but in most sports. But in curling, you usually see some of the older athletes. So I was that was 7 years ago. So I was 38, 39 years old, right? For them going at that age. And I mean, I guess for a lot of younger athletes, it would certainly be a bit of a different perspective, I think, than going, because Jennifer and I had already had kids, babies. Isabella was 1 and my daughter was 2 when we went to the Olympics. So, you have a little bit different perspective, and we were trying, and we got there. Whereas those guys, it's they got there. And then now they've been trying. So, it's just different experience. And I'm sure they would have a different perspective on it if they got a chance to go back.
It's interesting because you learn some things on the fly here as well. I remember when Carrie and Brad were in the mixed doubles and they were qualifying Canada, or they qualified Canada because they won, and that gave Canada the right to then go to the Olympics for curling. And myself and many others on Twitter, you can go look it back and track it and see, but we were wishing Carrie and Brad oh, best of luck, congratulations. And then they had to come out and they basically said, listen, we qualified Canada, we're not representing Canada. We could if we win a tournament that allows us to, but I think Carrie and Brad kind of want to do it their own way. Brad represent Team Canada for men's, Carrie for women, but worst case scenario, they do go to mixed doubles, but they still have to go through that whole process. And I was what? I was but you got us there. You should be representing Canada. What's going on here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, really, that's what happened last time in the 2018 games, because, Reed Crothers and Joanne Courtney qualified Canada for the Olympics as a nation, but then did not. Well, actually, I ended up playing with Reed in the Olympic trials, but it was Caitlin Laws and John Morris that ended up going on and winning the gold medal. But if it wasn't for Reed and Joanne qualifying the nation, Canada as a nation, they wouldn't have won the gold medal. So yeah, it's interesting, but that's how it works. And it's just that in Canada, we have such depth that we end up playing off for those things. Whereas in most other countries, they, maybe have a small playoff, but they don't have the same depth, or their teams get appointed. Team Hasselberg, they already know they're going to the Olympics. Team Tiranzoni from Switzerland, they already know they're going to the Olympics. So it's different in Canada because of our depth.
Yeah, and that's why people want to beat Canada. That's why they get up for Canada. They're we know you have depth, so this is your best of the best, so we're going to show you that this is our best.
Right.
So, I do think another thing that I want to mention that I thought was interesting there was, now when you had the bubble of doing curling last year with the pandemic, I thought it was kind of a really eye-opening experience. Now, I know you weren't curling in it, but you mentioned curling being a small community, and I think it came down to Rachel Homan versus Carrie Enerson in 2 different events. Each walked away with the finals win and championship. You have, Laura and Liam there rooting for Rachel. But it's kind of interesting because it's like, yeah, we're in a bubble, and then Carrie wins one, Rachel wins one. It's like everyone walks away with something here. But I thought it was really cool because I believe Carrie said in her interview that Laura had reached out saying, listen, if you need anything, someone to talk to, someone to bounce things off, or just like some kind of support, like, I'm here for that. I'm here for you. And I think it's interesting because, again, she's on Rachel Homan's side, hoping that Rachel wins. But at the same point, she's reaching out to Carrie more or less saying, yeah, if you need help with anything. And it goes to show you that, yes, there's competitiveness in sports, but there's also this human element or community side, like you were saying, because at the end of the day, like, you're a person with emotions and feelings. You're away from family, friends. Like, people don't know what's going on behind closed doors here. And I thought that was like a really cool thing because, people don't want to be alone, and to know that someone's out there saying, listen, you're not. Like, I'm here for you. I know we're competitive. No, technically we're on enemy lines here. But it's just a sport. At the end of the day, we're people. But like, did you have these kind of feelings in the bubble of like separation?
Yeah, and I think it kind of depended on the person as to how well or not well they were able to manage the bubble situation. I was in the bubble for World Curling Television, so I was on the broadcast side. So there was sort of like the athlete bubble, and then there was like the broadcast bubble. And the second time that when I went to cover the Women's World Championships, there was a positive case that somehow got into our side of the bubble. So they had to shut us down for a period of time until they knew that it hadn't spread very far. Yeah. So we were actually stuck in our hotel rooms for almost 6 days. And I found that really difficult, actually, because I think one of my biggest concerns was, what if I test positive?
Yeah.
One, how will I end up feeling, etc. But two, not only that, then I'm stuck in Calgary for another 2 weeks, isolated in my hotel room, and I can't go home to my family, right? So from a mental standpoint, I can see how it was really tough for a lot of people. And then some people probably managed it better than others. So I think the bubble was fine for me as long as I could get out of my room.
Yeah.
So we were able to do laps around our hotel room and stuff. The hardest part was just that when we got stuck in our room for 6 days, that was the really hard part. So it was nice. It's nice to see that the athletes were supporting each other and, being able to, have that similar experience, because not a lot of other people that would have had that bubble experience, right? So it was nice to see that they were supporting each other.
Yeah, because I think it's like an interesting dynamic because you do have different people coming from different backgrounds in a bubble. Like, some people have family that they're going to be able to Skype and communicate with, I believe in Laura's case. And it's like, there's no shade thrown here at her for this, but she was allowed to bring in Liam and her husband, who's also a curler. And that's something that kind of keeps you content. I think she said they just watched a lot of Netflix. She did some reading. She kept up with some other work that she had to do as well. But like, for those not with partners or families, I think it's nice that others could relate to that or reach out, because honestly, sometimes like a FaceTime or call is all someone really needs to not feel like they are in a bubble, pun intended, but like both literally and figuratively alone in a bubble. I know I FaceTime with friends in Ottawa to, just keep up with them and check in. And I know we're the generation that doesn't really text, doesn't like calls. We're a little bit like, hey, why are you calling me? I don't know that. Like, just text me. And if you can't text me, then why are you bothering me? But sometimes it's nice to, just check in with people, get out of that little bit of a comfort zone, get outside that bubble a little bit, because other people might need the interaction. Like, and I think for some of them, they try their best to do a FaceTime or Skype, which is good for them. But it's just a small little thing where I come from a broadcast background, so I'm kind of used to being around a camera. So it's nothing to me. It's like I can get up and someone's like, you look like shit today. I'm like, all right, where's the camera? Like, let's look like shit together.
Yeah, like I said before, it's a community, right? And they can share experiences because we all know what it's like. And, even now, with me not competing, I've still been around the events and stuff, so I can still sort of share and support people. So
I want to ask you, because of course, yes, you have kids. Like, do you ever think when you were doing curling, like, I don't know the age group now, but like when they were watching you curl, do they look at you as just their mom? Or like when years later, do you think they'll look at me like, damn, like my mom was good?
I think it's a little bit of both, and I think it's evolved a little bit because my daughter was only 2 when we went to the Olympics, so it just that didn't,
didn't register. She's just like, just change my diaper. I'm not worried.
No, and then she would have been like 6.5-ish when we won the Worlds in 2018 in North Bay, which she really enjoyed. And when we won, she was like, crying happy tears. Like she was just kind of starting to get into it a little bit more. And then I think as the time has gone on, she, we watched a lot of Olympics that was on recently in Tokyo. And I think it's started to register a bit, but then, at the same time, I'm just her mom. Like I'm her mom, and I still, give her shit for things.
I feel like at times you should like just as a joke to her. It's like, listen, if you're like clean your room, it's like, why do I have to clean my room? Listen, I didn't get these gold medals by not cleaning my room. And then she'd just be like, I don't want to be a curler. You're like, I don't care what you want to do. You have to be a gold in the room to clean your bedroom. And then that's where you develop. And you're still like, I laugh at it because sometimes when you listen to parents convince their kids to eat broccoli or something, and then the things that they convince them with, like I think on Instagram there was one where it was like, my kid wants to help me clean dishes. I allow him to clean dishes. All right. Years later, but like, why did you let me clean dishes? Like, well, you wanted to. I didn't tell you to. But anyways, we're getting close to the end here, and I made a joke at this in the beginning. But if you weren't, successful in curling, was there a backup plan? You mentioned how, you had an interest in broadcasting and you were involved in other sports, but was there a sport that you were just as good at as curling? Like maybe not to that peak, but you're like, hey, I could go somewhere with this, or like, hey, potentially, maybe not to the same success, but you'd at least give it a crack or give it a try.
Yeah, you know what? To be honest, I was a pretty decent soccer player. I don't think I would have been on the gold medal team from last year or anything, but I played in the Premier League here in Manitoba, and I loved playing soccer. I didn't have the greatest endurance all the time. Like I was a striker, so that was good. Right. But I might have maybe continued to play soccer for a little longer than I did. I ended up not playing it because I sprained both my ankles and whatever else, and I didn't want it to impact curling, which I could see me going places with. So, but in terms of any sort of other career, I probably would have gone further into broadcasting, because that at the time when I was younger, that's kind of what I wanted to do, was work in broadcasting and maybe sports broadcasting. So I might have gone a little more down that, because I knew early on that the news side of broadcasting was not my thing. I
feel you. I feel you on that one.
Court trials, and it just wasn't. I was like, nope. I'm too sensitive for this. So
I feel you. I went to communications, and I came out of that thing. I wanted to be in PR or broadcasting, but my parents are like, you want to be like a Peter Mansbridge or a Paul Hunter? I'm like, good for them, but it's just not for me, right? Jill, someone had asked this on Twitter, and I think it's a really good question. So I'm just going to ask it because I'm going to take credit for this person's question. But anyway, here it is. Have there been moments in your career where you're kind of like you've had lows, and how did you bounce back from those lows?
Yeah. Going back to losing the trials for Vancouver, right? Yeah. That was a low. There was a couple of Scotties in there where we lost finals, or, Worlds where it was like we were trying to get into the medals and didn't even win the bronze medal. Yeah. So yeah, there certainly was lows. And I think getting over it for me was always about actually processing it, like dealing with it and taking the time to deal with it, not just kind of sloughing it off and, moving on type thing. It was like, okay, what happened, and, what is it? What do I need to sort of process here so that I can park it and put it behind me and then move on and take those lessons forward. So that was part of the learning process though, too.
That's a good answer. Let's take one more. This one's from Facebook. This person asked, what are some of your interests or hobbies or things that you like after curling? It feels like this is like a documentary. It's like after curling. No.
Well, spending time with my family. We have a seasonal campsite, so we spend a lot of time outdoors there. Fishing in the summertime. Being with friends when I can, which has been a little sporadic over the last year and a half. And yeah, doing some reading. I love reading memoirs or autobiographies of athletes. That's kind of about it, I guess.
No, that's a good one. I want to ask you, like, when reading autobiographies of athletes, like, which ones kind of stand out to you, or like ones that you kind of remember?
Oh, boy, good question. I actually haven't read one in a while, but I've read Marnie McBean's, Katrina Maydon, Colleen Jones, Clara Hughes. I read Andre Agassi's, and as much as everybody says his book is so amazing, it actually didn't click with me, but that's fine. Yeah, and I mean, then I read like Elton John's, right? Like,
oh yeah,
that was a good one. The guy's lucky to be alive with all the drugs he did. Like, yeah, I don't know. I just like hearing people's. And sometimes, like with the athlete stories, it's like with Andre Agassi's, for example, I felt like he spoke too much about exactly what happened on the court and certain match points and things like that. Whereas I want to hear more about like the life side of it and how it impacted maybe your performance. But
yeah. Well, I mean, a good one, like if you ever pick it up, it's like, I know we had to read it in school, but it was like Theo Fleury's one, because I was actually kind of entertained with that one because I've never really followed Theo Fleury's career. It's like, I get it. I get like the whole impact of it. I think the last time he tried out for the Calgary Flames, they added that into it as well. And that's kind of where I remember it from. Mm-hmm. But I just thought it was interesting because I think there's one point in it where he talks about like, cocaine addiction or doing drugs, and how like even in New York, they would hire a private investigator to follow him around. I'm like, man, this is like FBI shit like you're getting into, but like some of these books are really good. Like I read a lot of sports broadcasting books, and then they tell you stories of how they got into their career, and I'm like, that's great, but you would have never imagined it, right?
Yeah, that's Theo Fleury's was a good one, actually. Yeah.
Do you have any like plans to come out with I guess like your own autobiography or your own book?
Somebody asked me that a while ago, and I never really thought of it. I feel like I needed to keep better track of certain things if I was going to do that, but I guess you never know.
That's what you should do, right? Like you'd be like, listen, I was on this podcast with a Newfoundlander. He brought it up to me, and like I decided, okay, I'm going to go back and listen to this interview, and then I'll just mark certain things down.
That's going to do it for this episode of Tobin Tonight. Our thanks to Jill Officer for coming on to the show. Remember, you can find past, present, and future episodes on TobinTonight.com, Spotify, and iTunes. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and leave a comment or two. For Tobin and myself, this is Jacob saying thanks for listening and good night.